When we started researching this story, we made a list of everyone we wanted to talk to. Most were Russian, but for reasons that will become clear, most of them wouldn't talk to us. We'd reach out, they'd reply, and then the moment we mentioned our subject, the 1999 apartment bombs, they'd go quiet. But there's one person everyone said we should talk to.
Okay.
Are we okay?
Yeah.
Someone who spent his life trying to figure out what happened in those 2 weeks that changed Russia.
Is David close enough to the microphone? Would you like him to be a little bit closer?
He's called David Satter.
What was it that drew you to working in the Soviet Union?
Well, if the question is what drew me to Russia and the Soviet Union, you have to go back literally to my childhood.
David was one of those nerdy kids who was just interested in Russia as a hobby. He grew up in the 60s, remembers his parents talking about the Cold War around the kitchen table, and decided to learn Russian.
I knew it that only a very restricted number of people from the West were even able to go to the Soviet Union and spend time there. And I never dreamed at that time, when I was 13 years old, that one day I would be one of them.
David started working in Russia in the 70s as a journalist for the Financial Times. So he'd been writing about Russia for 20 years by the time of the bombs in September 1999.
It was obvious that someone was blowing up residential apartment blocks and killing people in the middle of the night to inspire terror.
The blast happened before dawn as the building's 150 residents lay sleeping. An entire apartment block collapsed.
In just 12 days, 4 apartments had been bombed, some 300 people killed.
There was no warning and no escape for those caught inside. Whole families wiped out as they slept.
No one had taken responsibility for the attacks, but the government blamed Chechen militants.
Russia's Prime Minister Vladimir Putin blamed Islamic militants for the attack and said that Russian forces would wipe out their bases in Chechnya.
And because all the bombs had gone off at night, killing people as they slept, all over Russia people were now sleeping outside on the streets, hoping they'd be safer there.
And people left bewildered, distrustful and scared.
Suddenly, people throughout Moscow and throughout Russia feared of being blown up in their beds. And that had a huge psychological effect. The entire country felt it was under siege.
As night falls in the housing estates of Moscow, there's an almost palpable sense of fear and helplessness.
The country is in a state of total terror. Police are being inundated with calls from worried people reporting suspicious activity. Police departments everywhere are on edge. And this is true also of the city of Ryazan.
Ryazan. It's a city about 100 kilometres southeast of Moscow. And it's here, just a few days after the 4th bomb explodes, that something weird happens. The twist Andrew Harding mentioned at the end of episode 1. A twist that challenges the story that Putin's been telling about the bombs, and that David Satter has spent his life trying to unravel. I'm Helena Merriman, and this is the History Bureau, Putin and the Apartment Bombs. Episode 2, Sugar. Now, this twist, this 5th bomb, is where the ground starts to shift. It's the most contested part of the story, where the disagreements over what happened grow the loudest. And it's one of the hardest parts of the story to report. So here's how we're going to tell it. Every fact you hear from our reporters, we've checked against multiple independent sources. And where something can't be confirmed, we'll say so, clearly. So let's get into it. It's evening on September the 22nd, 1999, 6 days after the 4th bomb. And in the city of Ryazan, like everywhere else in Russia, people are patrolling their apartments, keeping watch. Volunteers are taking shifts, stopping anyone who looks suspicious. Everyone is on high alert. And then,
at about 9:30, a man by the name of Alexei Kartofelnikov noticed some very strange activity.
Alexei is on his way home from work when he spots a white Lada car parked outside his apartment. But there's something odd about it.
The last two numbers of the license plate were covered up with a piece of paper, which was very suspicious.
Alexei stands there watching the car when suddenly he sees a man burst out of the basement of the apartment
And rush into the car.
So Alexei calls the police.
At first, the police were not interested. They were getting lots of calls of suspicious activity, and they couldn't answer all of them.
Alexei keeps calling, and the police eventually come. But there's a hitch.
They didn't want to go into the basement because it had been used as a toilet by local derelicts.
Oh, so it stank.
Yeah, it stank. But they insisted, and the police went down there. And
What did they find?
Well, they bolted back up the steps and said there's a bomb in the building. And the entire building was evacuated.
Which must have been quite a scene.
Yes. People left in their bedclothes. Babies were removed from bathtubs.
In the panic, some people are left behind. People too weak or ill to leave the apartment. Those who make it downstairs stand outside, shivering in their pajamas and nightgowns. The police then call for backup and track down a local explosives expert. They go into the basement and they find 3 white sacks of powder connected to a detonator and a timer. They test the powder
and tested positive for hexagon.
Hexagon, a military explosive, the same type that was used in at least one of the other apartment bombs. Outside, the residents are still gathered in the cold, waiting for news. The owner of a nearby cinema invites them inside, gives them hot tea. And it's then that they hear what the police have found. A bomb, programmed to explode at 5 a.m, the same time as the previous 2 bombs.
And you can imagine the atmosphere in the movie theater at 5 a.m. as everyone in that theater understood they would have been dead if that bomb had not been discovered.
That morning, the people of Ryazan wake up to the news. A bomb found, and a city saved. Alexei, the man who spotted the suspicious car, has become a hero, the saviour of Ryazan. The head of the local FSB, Russia's internal security service, even comes to meet the residents. They're now back at their apartment, standing outside in their pyjamas while it's searched for evidence. He congratulates them for being so vigilant, says they should think of today as their 2nd birthday. Meanwhile, a manhunt has begun.
Ryazan is literally under siege. People everywhere are looking for the bombers, not just the FSB and the local police, but residents as well. All of the roads out of the city were blocked. The trains were blocked. The same thing for the airport.
Alexei talks to the police, gives them descriptions of the people he saw, and they draw sketches of the suspects.
Photos were placed in every store window in Ryazan, and especially next to the cash registers, so that if any one of the bombers tried to buy food, the cashier might recognize them.
And then, a few hours later, a call comes into the Ryazan phone exchange. A man at a payphone wants to be connected to a number outside the city. The operator puts it through. Then she does something she's not meant to do. She listens in.
So she hears this phone call.
Here's this phone call, and a male voice said that the entire city is locked down. We can't get out.
The voice on the other end tells the men to split up, to leave the city immediately. Then the line goes dead. The operator sits there, stunned. In the middle of a manhunt for the bombers, someone inside Ryazan is trying to escape. She scribbles down the number and passes it to the local police.
The local police said, well, thank God we've got the number. This is the number of the terrorists. And so they called on the number.
And they guess it's going to be a Chechen militant at the other end?
Well, they thought it would be someone who, one way or another, was connected to them.
Mm-hmm.
They trace the number and...
Turns out it's the FSB.
So it goes back to an FSB number?
Yeah, well, the people picking up are the FSB.
So, the people trying to escape the manhunt in Ryazan have just made a phone call, not to Chechnya, but to a number belonging to the FSB, Russia's own internal security service. That same day, police find the white car with a dodgy license plate abandoned in a parking lot. And then they track down two men who look just like the police sketches of the bombers, and they arrest them. And here's where things get even weirder. After they're arrested, the two men say, "We're not the bombers, we're FSB." They even take out their ID cards to prove it.
The FSB arrives, takes custody of them,
and takes the two men away. Okay, so to recap this very confusing picture. First, sacks of white powder turn up in the basement of an apartment, full of hexagon, a military explosive. Then a telephone operator overhears a suspicious phone call, one that leads straight to the FSB. And the two people the police pick up? Well, they too are connected to the FSB. But it isn't until 2 days later that the government finally makes an announcement about this fifth bomb. It's now mid-morning on September 24th. And in Moscow, in a conference room near the Kremlin, Russia's interior minister is preparing to speak. The room's packed, filled with police and government officials. The interior minister stands there in front of a red velvet curtain. And he starts listing proudly all the police's recent successes in the fight against terrorism. Eventually he comes to Ryazan, says he's proud that people there stopped the bombers. And that's it. The speech is over. There's no mention of the intercepted phone call or the men with the FSB ID cards, the ones who look just like the police sketches of the bombers. And then there's a 30-minute gap. A gap that people will puzzle over for years to come, and that changes the direction of this story forever. Half an hour after the Interior Minister's speech, the head of the FSB, Nikolai Patrushev, appears in the lobby of the same building. He's just come out of an emergency government meeting about the bombs. A Russian journalist spots Patrushev, asks him about Ryazan, and Patrushev, he says something that completely contradicts what the Interior Minister said just half an hour ago. Patrushev says there was no bomb. This wasn't a terrorist attack, he says. It was a training exercise, a drill organised by the FSB. The white powder in the sacks? It wasn't hexagon. It was sugar. He says the FSB staged similar drills all over Russia to make sure people were paying attention, a test that only the people of Ryazan passed.
What was your reaction to hearing them saying it was a training exercise?
It was absurd. That was absolutely absurd.
But the FSB stick with their story. What happened in Ryazan was a shining success, they say. A success for the FSB who planned the training exercise, and a success for the residents who spotted the fake bomb.
Some people were even given prizes for vigilance. The telephone operator who reported the telephone call was given a color television as a prize.
But despite the prizes, few people in Ryazan believe it was a drill. Not the residents, not even the local FSB. But a few days later, something shifts. The local FSB changed their story, now echoing the official line from Moscow. Now they say it was just a training exercise. They explain that the bomb squad mistook the sugar for hexagon because its testing equipment was contaminated after being used in Chechnya. So, to summarise, in just over 2 weeks, 4 apartments have been blown up in Russia, some 300 people killed. And now this, a thwarted bomb, which the FSB says was just a training exercise. It's a lot to take in for the people of Russia. And you'd expect questions like, why would a security service plan training exercises in the middle of these deadly terror attacks? And why did they wait 48 hours to tell anyone about it? But these questions get sidelined because something else is happening. Something that's taken the attention off Ryazan.
Misery returns to Chechnya. Just 3 years after its war with Russia, the fighter bombers are back.
The day after the strange events in Ryazan, Prime Minister Vladimir Putin gives the order. Russian fighter jets are to bomb Chechnya. 3 years after the First War ended, the Second Chechen War has officially begun.
Moscow says it's targeting what it calls bandits, the Islamic rebels it holds responsible for the recent spate of bomb blasts in Russia's cities. But it's ordinary Chechens who are dying. And
journalists at the time draw a direct connection between the apartment bombs and this new war. Footage streams into news bulletins all over the world. Villages on fire. Pictures of dead Chechen civilians killed by bombs from above. Already, this second war seems more brutal than the first. Then the next day, Vladimir Putin appears on TV. Wearing a suit, looking straight into the camera, Putin says he's going to track the terrorists down, wherever they are. Then he slams his hands on the table and says, if we find them in the toilet, we will catch them and wipe them out there. It's a new kind of speech from Russia's new Prime Minister. Blunt, aggressive, street fighter talk. And Russians seem to love it. Slowly but surely, Putin's approval ratings creep up. And soon Putin's image changes. He swaps his boardroom suits for military uniform, jumping into helicopters and planes, giving heart-thumping speeches to Russian soldiers fighting in Chechnya.
And suddenly this totally inconspicuous guy who had the charisma of a lizard was everywhere.
Remember, only a few weeks back, people hardly knew anything about Vladimir Putin.
He had no previous political career in that he had never run for office. He was considered kind of a gray mouse. In Russian, we would say Syria Mishka, just somebody totally insignificant. Unnoticeable, basically. Someone who would be good for surveillance because you would never pick him out of a crowd.
As the 5th Prime Minister in just 18 months, no one thought he'd last. But now, it seems he's here to stay. At this time of national tragedy, after the bombs, Putin stepped up, become the leader many Russians seem to want. A man of action and revenge. And as Putin's popularity soars, in the background, journalists are scrambling to find out more about him, to understand why Boris Yeltsin picked him, this obscure figure who'd spent most of his career in the shadows, working for Russia's security service. And they uncover a story that might explain things. It goes back to a few months before the bombs, to this moment when Yeltsin, Russia's once-loved president, was looking for someone to replace him. He was getting older, drinking more, and he was surrounded by corruption scandals involving him and the oligarchs, the businessmen he protected through his presidency. Yeltsin's great fear was that his successor might one day turn on him, investigate one of these corruption scandals, maybe send him to prison. And if anyone was going to uncover the truth about Yeltsin's corruption, it was a man called Yuri Skaratov.
So Yuri Skaratov was the prosecutor general, and he was digging into some cases close to the Yeltsins.
Here's the BBC's Andrew Harding, who you heard from in episode 1.
And he didn't seem to be getting the message that maybe these weren't the cases he should focus on.
One night on Russian state TV, a newsreader announces they have something to show. Something involving the prosecutor general. In fact, they're clearing the schedule for it. Viewers are warned the footage isn't suitable for anyone under 18. A video starts playing. It's the prosecutor general, but not as the Russian public are used to seeing him. He's naked, and he's in bed with two women. It's a sex tape, a long one.
I mean, it wasn't just 5 edited, discrete minutes showing a man with 2 prostitutes and everyone could get the impression. It was the whole tape.
A whole 55 minutes of airtime.
There was no blurring. It was an entire long sex session between this slightly aging, balding, portly gentleman and 2 younger women.
A sex session broadcast to the whole of Russia.
I interviewed Skaratov soon after this, and he understood that was a kind of revenge hit to try and sway him from some of the prosecutions that he was investigating. Somebody incredibly powerful had taken the tape, sent their minion to the TV station, and late at night persuaded somebody to put it on. And who could that have been? The suspicion was that it possibly was Vladimir Putin, and that this was a way of demonstrating loyalty to Yeltsin.
The day after the sex tape was broadcast, Putin, then head of the FSB, gave a press conference, said the video was real. So did Putin set up the sting operation? Perhaps. But like a lot of things in Putin's backstory, we don't know for sure. What is clear is that somehow Putin had earned Yeltsin's trust. And now, 6 months later, as Prime Minister, Putin is reinventing himself.
And suddenly, instead of being seen as a corrupt crony of Yeltsin's, he was recast as the defender of the country, the defender of innocent Russian people who had been the victims of a perfidious terrorist attack.
How quickly do his approval ratings change? Do they go from...
Dramatically, because he was on television constantly, vowing revenge.
Back in August, before the bombs, only 2% of Russians thought Putin would make a good president. Now, just a few months later, after the bombs, the new war in Chechnya, and Putin being all over the news, his ratings have soared to over 40%. It's now early October, a few weeks after the bombs. People in Russia are now sleeping back in their beds. But there's still a sense of unease. And although the world's media has now shifted its attention to the new war in Chechnya, there are still a lot of unanswered questions about the bombs. And under the radar, a few journalists are starting their own investigations, trying to get to the truth.
My premonition was that there was something very, very sinister going on.
Journalist David Satter had been calling his contacts, people with links to Russia's security services, trying to find out more. And tonight, in the light autumn rain, he's following a lead. He makes his way through central Moscow, past Red Square, and up to the top floor of a department store to meet 2 men, both former members of the security services.
We walked down to the end of a corridor and looked out the windows at the lights of the Bolshoi Theater in the city. We stood there for a long time, and I tried to absorb everything that they were telling me.
Did you make notes?
No. I didn't want to attract any attention. And I didn't want to tape anything, because that would have been awkward too, and possibly would have compromised them if those tapes fell into the wrong hands. But I committed everything to memory.
David talks to his sources for around an hour. They tell him they don't buy the official story that Ryazan was a drill, or that the apartment bombs were plotted by Chechen militants.
For one thing, it didn't make sense for the Chechens to bomb a working-class neighborhood, If the Chechens had been responsible, they would have bombed official buildings or the homes of the rich.
The men question how Chechen militants would have got their hands on hexagon, the explosive used in at least one of the bombs.
Because hexagon was produced only in a single factory, which was tightly guarded by the FSB.
And they mention something else, how the Russian authorities demolished the remains of the apartment blocks just days after the explosions,
which effectively destroyed the crime scene. This would never have happened if they were interested seriously to investigate who was responsible for the bombings.
And the two men are clear about who they think plotted the bombs. It wasn't Chechen militants, they say. It was the FSB. David stands there, taking it all in, unsure what to do with this information. It's hard to know what to make of it, even now. To be clear, I don't know who David's sources were. I can't call them up and confirm their story. I don't know how much to trust their specific claims. What we do know is that back in 1999, when David speaks to these men, their theory that the apartment bombs were an FSB plot was not mainstream thinking. There were hints of it in the Russian press, a few whispers of speculation. But in the Western press, almost nothing. It sounded too far-fetched, too much like a conspiracy theory.
I went back to my apartment and leafed through the press coverage of the bombings, including an article in Moskovsky Komsomolets, one of the biggest Moscow newspapers, which showed a picture of the apartment building with the lights on and photos of people whose lives had been snuffed out in these bombings. And I read over the biographies one by one, and I realized I had to do this. I realized I had to write something.
David sits down and starts writing. He lays out everything he's learned. The unanswered questions, the inconsistencies, the whispers from his sources. Then he calls a contact at the Washington Times, a small but influential paper back then, with a circulation of around 100,000. He pitches the story, and they say yes. It takes him all night, but by dawn, the piece is finished. He calls it Anatomy of a Murder. And in it, he says the apartment bombs weren't plotted by Chechen militants, but by the FSB. Then, just before he sends it, he pauses. He has no idea what the consequences of writing this could be.
I hesitated for a long time and then just pushed send.
And then he steels himself for what might come. Let's track to the end of the year. It's end of 1999, 31st of December. Just paint a picture of that moment.
So it's the millennium.
Here's the BBC's Andrew Harding again.
It's the millennium bug. The Americans are terrified. I heard a rumour that they'd replaced the swimming pool water with drinkable water because they were so worried that the millennium bug was going to stop everything. And then in the afternoon of New Year's Eve, completely out of the blue, nobody saw it coming.
Russian President Boris Yeltsin has resigned. He was due to leave office next June, but says he's going now because he's done everything he can for his people. Mr. Yeltsin...
The news came of Yeltsin stepping down.
I want to ask for your forgiveness, because many of our dreams did not come to pass, because what had seemed simple turned out to be terribly hard.
Sitting in the Kremlin, in a surprise lunchtime broadcast, Yeltsin gives an emotional speech to the people of Russia.
I ask forgiveness for not fulfilling some of the hopes of the people who believed that we could in one swoop, in one leap, jump from the grey, stagnant, totalitarian past into the radiant, wealthy, and civilized future. I am leaving. I have done everything I can.
Waiting in the wings in the Kremlin as Yeltsin gives his final speech, Vladimir Putin.
New elections will be held in 3 months. Until then, Prime Minister Vladimir Putin will be acting president. Mr. Putin has already taken control of the nuclear briefcase. By stepping down now and calling early elections, Mr. Yeltsin has made Mr. Putin almost unbeatable.
Thank you very much, Vladimir Putin said, casually accepting the leadership of the world's largest country.
In Russian news footage from that day, you see Putin and Yeltsin walk out of the Kremlin together. Yeltsin is trussed up in a long coat and fur hat, looking bloated. Putin, in contrast, looks wiry, youthful. The two men shake hands. Yeltsin then tells Putin to take care of Russia before he climbs into a car and disappears into the snow. It's now just a few hours before the millennium, this strange moment in history when some people thought the world might end. And on the streets of Moscow, the celebrations have begun.
Snow was coming down, people were letting off firecrackers drunkenly in their hands. There was a sort of extra rowdy atmosphere on Red Square. It was looking particularly beautiful.
Across Russia, families are gathering. Some praying for those they lost in the bombs, or for sons and fathers fighting in Chechnya. Others praying that the world as they know it won't end at midnight. Then, as the clock chimes 12, they switch on their televisions.
Tonight, Vladimir Putin made his first presidential address at midnight, a new face for the new millennium. There will be no power vacuum, he said. There was a warning too.
And their world has changed, just not in the way they thought. The change isn't instant. In fact, it takes a while to sink in.
It was only a few weeks later that people came back from their holidays and their hangovers, and the new year began, and suddenly, fait accompli. There was Putin, Yeltsin had disappeared, and we were in the Putin era.
On the front pages of newspapers all over the world, Putin's face looks out, strong, defiant. There are long articles musing about what kind of leader he'll be. But the story of the apartment bombs and Ryazan, mostly forgotten in the swirl of events. And the article David Satter wrote for the Washington Times, suggesting the FSB were behind the bombs, well, the paper took his piece, published it, and now 2 months had gone by.
And what was the reaction?
No reaction.
Nothing?
No. None whatsoever.
And let's be clear, so at this point you're the first Western journalist to be writing an article which is pointing the finger at the FSB.
Right.
And this is the first piece that has appeared in the Western press.
Yeah.
And there is no reaction.
None whatever.
Of course, David's piece, at the time he wrote it, back in October 99, was just one article, a drop in the ocean of Russia coverage that was mostly focused on the Chechen war. But what's striking is that this idea that the FSB might somehow be involved in the bombs, almost no one picks it up in the Western press.
Okay, why?
Because people prefer to sleep well, and the less they know, the better they sleep.
Do you think people just thought it was too preposterous?
It was too unbelievable.
Too unbelievable for the Western press, perhaps. But in Russia, it's a different story. Next time on Putin and the apartment bombs. While Western reporters move on to other stories, Russian journalists keep digging. And a TV network does the unthinkable. It convinces the FSB to take part in a special show, answering questions directly from the residents of the Ryazan apartment where the bomb was found. And the show? Well, let's just say for the FSB, it doesn't go as planned.
He warned us that this program will never be forgotten. They will never forgive you for this.
The History Bureau, Putin and the Apartment Bombs, is a BBC Studios production. Written and presented by me, Helena Merriman. The series producer is Sarah Shebier. Sound by Eloise Whitmore. And the executive editor is Annie Brown.